And we're getting these live visuals from the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where President Putin will be attending a ceremonial welcome. These are the visuals that we're getting right now from the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Now, he will, of course, after the ceremonial welcome, will be heading towards Rajghat for the wreath-laying ceremony. And that is the Indian President Draupadi Murmu and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi walking to then welcome President Putin with a ceremonial welcome.
अब गया अब दो खड़ी हो गई
कहाँ से आ गए दोनों भी जा रहे हैं वो प्रेसिडेंट ऑफ इंडिया गए थे जबरदस्ती ले आए इनको काम करता है
And while joining us live on the broadcast is Gurjeet Singh. He's the former Indian ambassador to ASEAN, Germany, Indonesia, Ethiopia, and the African Union. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast. Well, let's begin by asking you, we know that these talks are going to be taking place. According to you, what are the key strategic topics which we are expecting to come out of these historic meeting?
So I think at the macro level, India and Russia are exercising their strategic autonomy to find their own place in a transactional world where America and the Chinese are trying to set up a G2. So I think that is the broad frame. The second aspect is to strengthen the bilateral engagement where Russia is facing immense sanctions and India is facing secondary sanctions because of its relationship with Russia. So how to deal with this issue is the tightrope walk that India and Russia are both doing, because Russia has its engagement with the Trump administration. India has a very wary relationship with the Trump administration. And that relationship will be at the back of the minds during this visit.
Absolutely.
Now, the Russians want closer defense cooperation. They don't want to lose their market in India for defense goods. But India, while knowing that these items have stood us in good stead, also wants transfers of technology and wants to remain free of sanctions. For India, the primary goal is how to enhance the bilateral economic relationship. You know, after India started importing much Russian oil, the trade relationship has gone awry. So today, India has a trade deficit of $60 billion with Russia, second only to what it has with China. Now, this is unsustainable. India's exports to Russia are only 5 billion. So I think the business meeting today and the consequent agreements that emerge should look at how Russia can source a larger amount of goods and services from India. India would like to find a Russian market for the kind of goods which are facing high tariffs in the United States, for instance. And Russia has a large amount of rupee reserves in India. How can they be used to bolster the Indian economy?
True, true. I was going to come to that. And also, we have we were going to cut to these live visuals that, of course, we are getting from Rashtrapati Bhavan, but also Siddhant, our Assistant Editor of Foreign Affairs, is joining us too. Siddhant, if you could just give us a brief of what's happening on the ground and what is next to happen in the latest.
Well, on the ground, a lot of media frenzy, a lot of security personnel present on the ground as well. I'm standing just in front of the Hyderabad house where the talks will happen, the summit will happen, the 23rd India-Russia summit. But before that, action happening at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where the ceremonial reception is all set to start in a few moments from now. The top Indian leadership, the Indian Prime Minister, the cabinet members, External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar are present there. There will be a tri-service guard of honor to the Russian president, something that is part and parcel of any state visit. But essentially, during this state visit, focus is on outcomes, several packs from shipping to mobility to focus on economic relationship.
Right, Siddhant, of course. You mentioned those relations. Now, I'd like to come back to you, Ambassador. We talked about trade that we've been talking about. We talk about defense. Now, of course, the other topic that we also talk about is immigration, which has been a great level of issue. When it comes to Russia and India, what kind of people-to-people engagement can push this bilateral relationship further?
For mobility agreements for Indians to work abroad, Russia is a latecomer, but now a high flyer. The number of Indians in Russia has already risen to 100,000. A large number of them are actually students. And during the Minister for External Affairs' recent visit to Russia, India opened 2 new consulates in Russia, which shows that our people-to-people engagement is actually expanding. So if there is more Russian investments out of their rupee holdings, this could lead to parallel holdings in Russia with more Indians getting employed. The export of manpower of skilled and semi-skilled nature from India to Russia will be an important part of this meeting today. And I think that will be one of the salient features that we will see.
Right, and also if you could also talk to us about how is India managing its broader multipolarism that we get to see here, especially with, the relationships growing between Russia and China, and maybe even the U.S. trying to go and talk to China. How do you analyze it, Ambassador?
Let's be honest, till the Ukraine crisis, multipolarity was a fact. And Russia was a pole, Europe was a pole, ASEAN was a pole, India, US, we were all poles. But once the Ukraine crisis set in, Russia has become much closer to China and Europe to the United States. So due to which today the Americans have the temerity to say that we want a G2 with China, basically excluding the rest of us. So this visit of President Putin is a reassertion of multipolarity and a resistance to bipolarity. But at the same time, I must say, Russia also needs to stand up and be counted. Whether it is in BRICS or in SCO or in the East Asia Summit, Russia is playing a very quiet secondary role to China and not really standing up with India on common issues.
All right. Ambassador, I'll get back to you. Also, Siddhant, if I could just come across to you. We know that defense and trade are these topics that are dominating these talks. What are the other things? We know that when it comes to export and import, we see that our import is more, India's import is more than export. What are the other sectors that could potentially help in balancing a trade between Russia and India?
Well, in terms of the trade agreement, the focus will be on the India-Eurasian agreement, the Eurasian Economic Zone agreement. We know that talks have already started in the past and focus is on how both sides can take it forward. Now, this Eurasian economic area not only includes Russia, which is the major country, but also includes Central Asian countries, also includes Armenia. And this will be a significant pact wherever it is signed. But in terms of economic engagement, another focus is the transportation aspect, the shipping agreement that is expected to be signed. Now, Chennai-Vladivostok agreement is something that happened a few years ago. It is technically functional, but the focus is to get more shipping lines through that corridor. There is the international north-south transport corridor that is already functioning, that connects to Mumbai to Moscow and passes through Iran and Armenia. The focus is for the use of Chabar port. So there are many economic linkages both India and Russia are exploring.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned some really, really important issues there. When we also talk about, Ambassador, I'd like to come to you. How would you analyze India's balancing act when it comes to tariffs? Then there's also the Ukraine conflict, the dynamics with China and engaging with Russia. How would you analyze India's role in balancing, in a balancing act there?
In order to add to what your correspondent said, I would think agricultural products,
right,
dairy,
absolutely.
marine products, fisheries, meat, vegetables, I think these are likely to find a big market. Secondly, all the things which are now becoming expensive in the US, like our textiles, our pharmaceuticals,
Right.
and other things, garments, I think all that could find a way. But now coming to your question, this is the tightrope part. India wants this Ukraine war to end. Russia says they want it to end. The Americans say they want it to end. But Russia is not suffering from the United States, whereas India is suffering tariffs from the United States because we are buying Russian oil, while the US continues to buy nuclear fuel from Russia. So this is the inequality of the world, which can only be addressed when we have ourselves a more powerful economy. Secondly, when it comes to only tariffs, I think we are being very careful during this visit not to do anything which will upset the current phase of Indo-US trade negotiations, which we are very keen to complete, because after all, the US is among our largest trading partners with whom we have a surplus, unlike Russia, with whom we have a huge deficit.
Right, absolutely. And you mentioned sanctions, so I would like to also ask you if given the extensive Western sanctions on Russia, is that likely to impact anyhow in these commitments that Moscow's ability for this commitment to India?
Two aspects to it. One, those sanctions open up a market which Indian goods and services can fill because they're not able to import it from elsewhere. But secondly, dealing with, let us say, Russian banks. I understand that Sberbank, the largest Russian bank, which has an office in India, is likely to sign an agreement today. Now, Sberbank is under Western sanctions, but operating out of India and not using the SWIFT system, not using dollar clearance or euro clearances, simply using the rupee for trading is something that is doable. Now, this is what we need to do. But we have to be careful that Western countries often see an Indo-Russian success and then sanction it, like the case of energy companies. And Russians had invested in energy companies in India. But when they were doing well, recently the Europeans sanctioned them. So we have to be careful, and these sanctions are all illegal. They are not UN mandated sanctions, but they are a reality. So you have to work with them. So the idea is to create institutions in India which are not linked to the Western financial system and work only with Russia and China so that any sanctions on them do not impact others. But in India, we don't have many such institutions yet.
Siddhant, I'd like to come to you as well. If you could also elaborate on the multipolar, role that India has played. We know that U.S. has somehow called out on BRICS, but India stands on its multipolarism. If you could just elaborate on that for us.
Yeah, multipolarity is here to stay. We have seen how there has been rise of middle powers like India, Australia, South Africa, and of course at a time when Donald Trump's tariffs have been creating problems globally, including for countries like India. Focus will be as to how these countries can up their engagement. We saw earlier last month the India, Australia, Canada trilateral being announced with focus on partnership in innovation and AI. There was also, of course, the summit, India, South Africa, Brazil summit in Johannesburg on the sidelines of the G20 summit, where the three large democracies of the global south working together. We will see more of such quadrilaterals, trilaterals as well. And at a time when India is upping its engagement, there's a big question on the Quad as well. In fact, this year, India was expected to host the Quad summit, but it hasn't happened. It won't be happening. This is for sure. Next year, there could be a possibility, but all depends on India-US relationship, which have been at their lowest in 20 years, primarily because of Donald Trump's tariffs. And today's economic announcement should be seen through the lens of the Donald Trump's tariffs that have been imposed on India. And that, of course, causes economic loss for India, even as US has been trying to veto India's own decisions to trade with countries like Russia, importing of Russian energy. We know that already because of sanctions on Iranian oil, India is not importing energy from Iran. India is not importing energy from Venezuela. And it is primarily because of the American policies. Now, American policies now are basically trying to make sure that India also reduces energy imports from Russia. So there will be questions as to how the policies of the American administrations trying to influence the decisions of large countries like India, which are a major part of the global south. So when it comes to the American dynamics, yes, it plays into the mind of the Indian and the Russian leaders when they meet at the Hyderabad House, which is behind me in a short while from now.
Absolutely. Because you, Siddhant, you just mentioned that, I would like to come to Ambassador about this whole, when it comes to tariffs. We know that the talks between India and US are ongoing. We know that we will have some US officials come to India next week. Is there any way, would that be impacting, how would the US be looking at these bilateral meet between President Putin and PM Modi, and how likely is it to impact the trade talks?
I think if we were to have new defense agreements for purchases of items, which the US is also interested in exporting to us, that will really trouble the American negotiators. They are not working on a pure trade system. They are working on a strategic trade engagement with India, which is linked to purchases of, arms and ammunition, planes, things like that. So I think that is the fine line we need to tread, not entangle the American eagle while dealing with the Russian bear.
Absolutely. Of course. Ambassador, I will just come to you, but we have some live visuals right coming in. We know that President Putin has now arrived for a ceremonial welcome at the Rashtrapati Bhavan. We see the Indian President Draupadi Murmu and Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi waiting to welcome President Putin, after which a ceremonial welcome will be taking place.